going to be pivoting now to our Q&A. And as I mentioned, and Kent has actually said earlier, this Q&A is really meant to be not just a question and answer for the board members. And before we pivot into that, there's just a couple announcements too. We want to have anybody in the community not only answer questions or ask questions, but we can also have them answer questions and present pain points, give suggestions, comments. Perhaps we should add that to our Q&A. You know, comments are most welcome. Stuff that you heard over the last couple of days that you want to say something about, or you want to, pick up for conversation again. We're going to do our best to facilitate a sort of vibrant, interactive experience here. But before we do that, I will just highlight that we have a couple, obviously on the screen, we have several board members. We have several board members in attendance who can also answer questions too. And I'm going to turn it over to Kent to introduce our newest board member who is here as well. So Kent, if you don't mind, over to you.
I don't mind at all. First off, let me sort of set the ground, the stakes, so to speak. Over the past 25 years, for all intent and purposes, we've had NIST representation on the board. This has been extremely valuable to us from the standpoint of working with those folks who are working with the NVD, trying to get our gameplay in motion on both sides. Coordination was important. The understanding of where we were going was important for NIST and the NVD folks. Over the last year or year and a half, we've seen the NIST representation move on, folks moving away from actually working with the NVD and with working with NIST. And that has not been good for this program. NIST has been from the beginning a very valuable partner. So the board has decided that we may, especially with additional efforts in other parts of the world, as we've mentioned with ANISA and the EU and Southeast, in Asia with the JP CERT, we may find ourselves in a place where we want to have their voices directly heard on the board. So we've created a board position called a liaison position, organizational liaison position. And we've asked and invited NIST to be the first of those so that we have that kind of ongoing partnership, ongoing collaboration and coordination that historically we've benefited from greatly. And that was approved by leadership at NIST, which was something I was very pleased to see. Thank you, Kevin Stein and ITL. But in doing so, we wanted to also make sure that we today introduced Chris Turner, who has a long history with in the vulnerability management community and with NIST and with the NVD, and I think just about everybody here has talked to him at some point in the past. We're quite pleased to introduce the NIST liaison for the board. So he will be a full board member. He'll be able to vote and do all the things. He'll be able to complain like many of us do, and many of us do, on all sorts of range of issues. So I just wanted to take a minute and welcome Chris to the board and let folks know that he and NIST are now participating again in a very productive way with the CV program. Chris?
Yeah, Chris, it's great to have you here. I don't know if you want to say a quick word or anything.
Oh, yeah. So thanks for the introduction, Kent, and everyone. Thank you for allowing me to be a member of the board. I'm actually very, very excited to, as Ken put it, complain a lot, but to help drive things forward. That's really the goal of all of that. So I'm very excited to do that and looking forward to it.
Honestly, that's probably the biggest perk, I would think.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, it's great to have you here. And yes, we're going to be opening up the floor, so to speak, now for a panel. Just because Chris is here does not mean this is going to be an NVD question panel. I know that's probably tempting to everybody on the call, but no, this is everything. So as I said, I'll try and reiterate it quite quickly, is this is an open floor. We've talked a lot about different things to the last couple of days, and there's a lot of stuff that we could continue to talk about. I am just looking at the Q&A format. If you have a question, you can do two things, right? You can raise your hand, you can put it into the Q&A, and I can read it out. If you have a comment, the same thing applies. We really want to hear from you when it comes to all sorts of things. And given that I do not see a question thus far, I'm going to put myself on the spot, and I am going to start us off, and then we'll go from there. So for the broader community and anybody who wants to answer it, how can the CVE program encourage more participation from underrepresented regions or sectors or industries, right? Such as smaller companies, nonprofits, academic institutions, car manufacturers, I think came up before some of these. What are some of the things that we could do? And I'm curious to hear anybody's thoughts on that. And then I'll be monitoring the rest of this. Oh, we got a question too. So over and out, or not out, question and answer. Go ahead.
You want us to answer the question, right?
Anybody. Yeah.
Right. I'll say what I think is a small, easy thing, and it's not a huge scalable long-term solution, but it's my belief that even today, with all of the current rules and processes, there are sort of gaps in CVE coverage, aka there are publicly disclosed vulnerabilities floating around out there, and they are missing a CVE ID. And there's some fun anecdotes where sort of I use the phrase CVE or it didn't happens, which is unfortunate. So a very small, maybe not a small scale, but a immediate term sort of thing would be perhaps to try to figure out ways to more proactively just increase the known existing coverage issues, gaps. I don't know exactly how, but yeah.
Cool. All right. I don't see any other hands up.
So let me jump in real quick. I think this is one area where CVE has traditionally been a normal network IT kind of environment. Cloud came, we've sort of moved into cloud. And at the same time, though, there's a lot of other technologies out there that we're not even touching. Automotive was mentioned, healthcare. We do have a few healthcare CVEs, but not anywhere near what we should have. And a lot of that is just a matter of, I think, in some respects, getting to the right people who we can then explain the value to their industries, their technology bases. Because I think everything's using software nowadays. There isn't an area of our society that doesn't use software. We should be driving more into areas that traditionally have not worried too much about these types of concerns. And as they move forward, they're going to have to, and that will help us to bring CVE to the masses, so to speak, and that will help those other sectors.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Kent. Thanks, Art. So I'm going to call out a question. It looks like Megazone, is going to answer this question. I don't know if he's typing right now, but I'm going to read it out. And Megazone, if you would like to answer it, please do unmute yourself and do so. So Simon says, Art touched on this earlier. As a software vendor, we are regularly asked about vulnerabilities detected in third-party libraries that we make use of in our code. Sometimes our software is impacted, sometimes not. What are the panel's thoughts, and at this point now, I think anybody's thoughts, on the right way to make it known if one's products are to existing CVE records and how to report the product-specific CVSS? And will the CVE program support this in the future? That's a lot of stuff. So, Megazone, do you want to answer that? Because
that's why I clicked the answer live since we were doing this live Q&A. And I know, like, Art did touch on this earlier. Yeah, this has been in discussions. There's been some discussions started around this, like, how do we do this? As you know, I can have like a hat rack with different hats I put on. You know, I'm a member of working groups. I'm a CNA liaison of the board. I'm a CNA myself. Well, I'm a CNA rep for F5. As a CNA, we have the same issue, right? We have a lot of third-party open source stuff in our products, and we often publish security advisories for third-party CVEs that affect our products or don't affect our products. We can get responses because customers are interested. Hey, OpenSSL published this new CVE. Are you affected by this? We know it's in your product. There is currently no good way to feed that into the CVE program so that it's consumable from a central location. You have to kind of go to every vendor. I know the solution I'm in favor of, which is CNAs as ADPs, where a CNA could contribute, their scope would be limited to them as a CNA. So in my case, F5, we could contribute to that CVE record with an ADP record saying for F5's products, here's the score, here's, vulnerable, not vulnerable, all the kind of information ADP would provide within our scope. We wouldn't say anything about anybody else's products. But there were discussions happening about how to do that. There's other suggestions on how we can go about doing this. So I think we are heading that direction. Discussions have certainly been going on around this topic. And I know Art probably has something to say about this. He's been, like you mentioned earlier, but there's a few different ways of doing this. I personally don't feel that. I personally would love to see it in the CV records. There are certainly other externalities that could handle some of this. I think Art, I saw Vex pop up in the chat. Yeah, Art just mentioned Vex. There's some other solutions out there, but I think it would also be great to have it in the record where you can just grab it out of a record.
Yeah. Thanks, Megazone. Yeah, appreciate that answer. And I think, Chris, you wanted to add to that too. Chris?
Oh, yeah. I was just going to say part of that same question, I think Simon asked, or he alluded to it. There's even been discussion on, a CNA as an ADP and adding extra information about what products they have that are affected by the upstream. But what if there's a lot of customers or consumers that are interested in whether you're not affected? And, maybe Art, I think you mentioned this in another call at one point too. You're getting calls all the time and people are asking, are you affected or not? Well, maybe we should store that data as well. So a CNA ADP container could have information that pertains to the fact that you're not affected by this, even though maybe there's an assumption that you were. So.
Yeah, thanks, Chris.
Yeah.
All right. So we have a bunch of answered questions. We have answered a few questions. I don't see any other questions. I don't see any hands up. So I wonder if we might draw from the CVE program myths. Chris, you shared this with me earlier today. I think this is a good one. So what this is, and I think we've got a podcast, right, about this a while ago. It might be a little dated now, talking through some of the myths of the CVE program. But there's a lot on here, and I think they sort of come from a place of lots of questions before, if I could say, that we've fielded as a program from different places. I'm trying to pick one that might be good. Actually, you know what? I'm going to pick from this, but pivot a little bit, because I think this is something that we talked about. Perhaps, Kent, I'm going to call you out. You don't necessarily have to answer it, but it's sort of a thought exercise. I'm recalling it perhaps from the founder's note in the 25th anniversary report document, and that is specifically to the notion of a vulnerability being a bad thing, right, or a sign of weakness. And this didn't actually come up in the panel sort of next 25 years. Granted, if the program's gone, then, I guess that solves all our problems. But the idea being that, vulnerabilities nowadays are viewed in a different way than they were in 1999. They're not necessarily viewed in the right way yet, and different people view them differently. I mean, you're not going to have that being the same. But Ken, do you want to get us started on just that notion and what we should be striving for from a program perspective as we start talking about program adoption, CNA adoption, and the notion of a vulnerability in one's products?
Yeah, this is part of the evolution of the landscape that we're dealing with. When we first started CVE, vendors were going out of their way not to issue CVEs. They didn't want us anywhere around their products. They were not exactly happy to have those kinds of conversations. Fast forward 15 years, and it's now commonly known that every single piece of software has a bug in it, and anybody that tells you otherwise is delusion. So the reality is, in the past, we've really seen that hesitancy to participate in the CD program. Now, the real change has occurred from a perspective of the community, and because people realize that there are so many pieces of software and so many bugs in their own pieces of software, that they need to be transparent to the customer base that they're dealing with. If they're not transparent, then they're actually being a very immature software vendor from a security perspective, and it's the customers who are the ones that are going to be hurting. So if you're buying software from somebody who refuses to issue CVEs, it's time to deinstall that software. The reality is that attitude is starting to actually be understood well within the end user customer communities, and they want to know when there's a problem. In fact, we've had multiple incidents that, everybody and their dog has called support line because something went out to the press about a version of a vulnerability in the wild that was affecting, open source libraries or other pieces of software that would impact them. And they want to know, how that transparency of how to fix it, how to deal with it, how to mitigate it, how to identify it on their networks is something that we're seeing a lot more of from the user base out there, as opposed to the vendors pushing back. Vendors don't get to push back too often when customers are in the middle of a support escalation. So just know, if your company is a little hesitant to record CVEs, identify them, and push them out to the customers, regardless of whether you have a fix or not, it's in your best interest from a economic perspective. And I think that shift in attitude towards the fact that you need to be transparent is pretty major, and we're benefiting from it from a CVE perspective, because now more people want to have that means and that mechanism to be able to say, we're being transparent, we're part of the CVE program, we're CNAs. So that helps. But it really was a shift, and at times it was a battle with certain vendors.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks, Kent. That's great. It's got us started, and I think we have a couple hands to answer this. I thought this might be thought-provoking. So, Chris, I think I saw your hand go up first. You want to go first?
MZ first.
All right, MZ first. Over to you.
Yeah, we're seeing, we've been a CNA now over 8 years, I think, and back in 2016, we joined as a CNA. And attitudes have certainly changed in that time, and we still do occasionally run into the why are we publishing dirty laundry, or why are you publishing dirty laundry type thing. Why share these things? Over the years, I've developed a mantra I think some people are sick of hearing from me, which is our customers can't make informed decisions about their networks if we don't inform them. And that it's our job as a vendor, as a CNA, to provide the information so that customers who are running our products, or it's our case as a vendor CNA running our products, know what they have to manage in their networks. Do I need to upgrade? Because the real world, it's easy to wave your hands and say everyone should always be running the latest version of software. That's not happening. We know that. Resources are finite. People have to schedule, prioritize maintenance windows and what gets done. Do I need to fix my F5s this week, or my Ciscos, or my Palos, or anything else? Because what's my priority? And it's up to us to give them that information so they can make those decisions. It's their network in the end. They decide what is important to them. They may say there's other mitigations. Oh, it's behind a firewall, I don't have to worry about today. And that's fine. That's legitimate. So I think we are seeing a lot of shift, even from customers and from the industry in general, more of an appreciation of vendors and CNAs who are open and providing information, instead of it being the how dare you make this public and now I got to worry about stuff. It's more thanks for letting me know so I can deal and know how to manage my network. And I feel like there has been an attitude shift, and we're also seeing that from regulatory agencies. From just this past week or two, PCI published a new version, the DSS4 from them, which is going to require a lot more openness about vulnerabilities. And so we're seeing industry groups and regulators and stuff getting on with this too. Of hey, you gotta open up and tell us about things.
Yeah, great answer, Megazone. I appreciate that. Chris, over to you.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah.
No, I think we had a question earlier about how to grow the program. And I think for me, and I didn't mention it at the time, but for me, it's, if the consumers of these products, and when I say consumers, I mean consumers of software, if they're demanding that products have, CVEs and see that the vendor is fixing those CVEs and they have a good disclosure policy and, they're doing the things they should to make their product secure, I think that's the most important thing. And I think when customers of software look maybe at the CVE list and see that there's nothing for the product that they're maybe thinking about or demoing or whatever, I think that's a key, right? That's where the customer asks, are you involved in the CVE program? Are you fixing security issues? And that will drive them to participate in the CVE program. That will drive the software producers to participate. So maybe for us, it's more, how do we educate the consumers about why CVE is important? The consumers of software in general. So I think that was just the key was, I think this kind of piles on what Ken said earlier. It's, trying to change that mindset of CVEs are a bad thing, but not really. It's the opposite.
Everybody makes mistakes. How you deal with them is what's important.
Yep.
Right. We should try to get the Better Business Bureau or similar agencies around the world to consider whether this vendor is a CNA in their ratings. That's an interesting one. Okay, so I will start to ask some other questions too. Oh, wait, we got other hands up too. I will say that Todd has a great question for CNAs in the chat. So if you are a CNA, he's doing a data call on some of the pain points that you had in becoming one, or barriers. So Art, over to you.
Yeah, I'm going to blame/credit Josh for reminding me of this point. As your time marches on and software becomes in all of our stuff, including implantable medical devices and this stupid minivan in my driveway that's full of computers that don't work right, or software doesn't work right, probably. It's sort of unavoidable, but it's sort of happening. It hasn't really happened yet. Talk about this word called product liability. And so without necessarily speaking for anyone other than myself or making this, the CVE program's direct responsibility, I've thought a lot about this over the years in my career, and I have a ever evolving, just sort of absolute minimum bottom line that someday I would love to see something like that be enshrined in case law or a regulation somewhere or something. And in case anyone's worried about what I'm about to say next, it's not a high bar. Just about any CNA worth their salt probably meets it. But you might consider, for example, and again, we just said this, right? Hey, there's a vulnerability in X, it got exploited, something happened, there were costs, there's investigations, there might be a shareholder lawsuit, there might be an SEC action, all sorts of stuff could happen, FTC, in the US at least. NIS2, Kent mentioned earlier, has a little thing about sort of individual responsibility for C-suite corporate officers. So, right. The way I look at this is it's pretty tricky, it turns out, to say that piece of software was built in a way that was somehow measurably sort of negligent or below the responsibility line. But what I would suggest is that the historical and current activities and behaviors of the software vendor, provider, supplier, producer are something you can observe. And you know what you can observe? A coordinated disclosure policy, CVE IDs, being a CNA, being on record of having taken responsibility for whatever they were, mistakes, design choices, whatever the causes were. Hey, I'm in an actual legal court regulatory situation. I'm playing defense, and on my defensive scorecard is I'm a CNA, good standing, publish CVE IDs, do it right, engaged in a working group. I fix the bugs when I find them and I'm told about them. In my mind, that would pretty much solve a liability sort of discussion. There could be more to it someday in the future, but the bar I'm looking for would be I'm out there fixing stuff. and a measurement of I am a CNA in the CVE program is pretty powerful point to have.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks, Art.
Down. Okay.
There you go. Yeah. So we've got an interesting question here. Envisioning a future, which is a good thing to do every once in a while. So from Christopher Fearon, I hope I pronounced your name right. Could you envision a future? This is for anybody. This might trigger some folks. Could you envision a future where ADPs and their submissions are self-governed by blockchain technology? It would reduce the uplift required for CNA onboarding and evolve the role of CVE maintainers. Raise your hand if you'd like to answer that. All right.
I think there's a lot of things we can envision here. I'm just, the real question is, what can we actually implement and integrate into the infrastructure? And I think that's a bigger question, although I don't think this question is too far off of the types of things we should be considering going forward. In some cases, like with the AI ML working group, we have a lot of learning to do, but when it comes to trying to, have this self-governed type of infrastructure, that's the next generation step up for CVE, because right now we're just trying to manage, the program in a way that we can start to get people to really participate and really be much more transparent. So yes, this is a great idea. It's an idea, and we still have to put all the meat behind it. Anyway,
I just want to say a little bit in generic and non-expert support for that idea. Might be the weird person saying the blockchain might be good in this situation, and I'm truly not an expert, but we don't need to invent CVE coin or anything, right? But relatively immutable. I think it's immutable if it's working right? Distributed transaction ledger. A CVE was reserved, it was assigned, it was published, it was changed again, a container was added, it was disputed, it was undisputed, it was rejected. Imagine that history, right? Public, transparent, all out there. Imagine also, and I'm definitely stepping even farther away from my knowledge of blockchain here, right? There's a little bit of the proof of work sort of trick where, instead of some randos throwing up a bunch of garbage information about a CVE record, if that happens, right, over blockchain technologies, that sort of stuff gets downvoted and not. You can start to recognize, hey, a bunch of people agree with that transaction. Okay, probably Microsoft publishing authoritative information about their record, and the blockchain noticed that, and people think it's real, sort of counts. Now, how to go about that, I'm just not skilled enough to do that, but I'm not against, despite what Todd says, a potential application of blockchain distributed transaction ledger for CVEs. Over.
Thanks, guys. Yeah, no, thank you for the question. No hate intended. That's why I was joking about the trigger. I think anytime there's certain words, right? AI is sort of one of them too. Blockchain for sure. That always get people going. So we have a couple of questions here. We did this one. So let's see. This is a question for Art, and then I'll spin up the other question. I don't know if this is a fast question, but Art, were there any relevant takeaways for the CVE program from the Vuln forecast this year?
Yeah, I'll try to do the fast version. Yes, that event is a small first technical colloquia, first.org, if you're interested in looking that up. Yeah, there's the URL there. That event is titled sort of vulnerability forecasting. It gets a lot into vulnerability measurement. Just about everyone talking there was using CVE data in some way. The sort of conversations about sort of data quality by the folks who are data scientists and are looking for sort of holistic data quality. There's a lot of that sort of discussion. I wouldn't say there was anything shockingly. There was a lot of interesting work, nothing shockingly new that I would bring home and say, oh my goodness, I'm going to go file 3 GitHub issues in CVE for things that have to get addressed, immediately. There are things that the program is aware of, and it's clearly in the, institutional, industrial, consumer of the data quality discussion area. So that's my summary. Thanks.
Great. Yeah, thanks, Art. And that link, I know I answered it, but if you want to see that link that was just mentioned, it's in the answered tab in the Q&A. Okay, no other questions. I will go ahead and ask one. So we've talked a lot recently about the idea of quality, things like ADPs. If I might try and distill this down to this notion of increasing the value of a CVE record, right? How can the program, I mean, I guess gave a couple of examples of this, and I'm curious if people want to speak to those ways of doing it. But one of the goals that I think we outline in the CVE program 25th anniversary, report as we look towards the future, and it ties a little bit off the point before that was raised around the downstream consumers and better serving their needs. How can the CVE program enhance the value of CVE records to better serve those needs, right? So different types of stakeholders, need different kinds of information. And so I wanted to open the floor on the notion of increasing the value of CVE records, both in what we're doing now, but also maybe things we're not talking about at all. So broad thought. Megazone, over to you.
Yeah, I think some of what we're doing now that's been talked about in the past 2 days, yesterday and today, we have, I can't remember what we're calling it, but kind of the gold star award we're giving people for providing CVSS and CWE. Is that, the minimal, the fundamental goal of the program is to get an identifier for a vulnerability, right? That hasn't changed. But so we're not requiring more, but we're encouraging CNAs to provide richer data. That, I think, makes CVEs much more usable for downstream consumers. As was said a couple times, there's discussions, there's possibilities we may require more fields in the future to make things more consistently valuable. That's a fraught topic a little bit. I know we showed the stats yesterday of CNAs who are providing CVSS and or CWE, mostly both, in their records. With the CPE fixes coming in the next schema, we'll probably see some more adoption of CPE from especially larger CNAs. All of this, I think, makes things more usable. We're also seeing more participation from some of these downstream consumers in the working groups. We have people who are doing data science, data analysis on CVE who are coming to the AWG meetings, the QWG meetings, and providing their input, saying, hey, this would make this more useful to me. This is a problem I see with the program. Opening things in our GitHub repositories, opening, call it a ticket or an item, okay, what the issue. Reporting, hey, this is what I'd like to see. I'm in favor of all this. I think this is great. I'd love to see more downstream consumers participating, because we can guess what they want. We can think about what we think they might want, but what we really want to hear is what they actually want, right? And instead of trying to come up with theories about what would make things better for them, tell us what's better for you. And help evolve the program to make it more useful, not just for CNAs on the supply side, but for consumers as well.
Thanks for that. Yeah. Any other thoughts on that that notion of providing increased value to downstream consumers of different types?
Just to add on to what MC was saying, we have been discussing a survey of CVE users, and I forget exactly where that discussion is happening, which working group. So just to say, we are taking to heart the idea that, of course, collectively, we have some knowledge of our users, but maybe we don't, or maybe those aren't good assumptions to stick with. So, Kent.
Yeah, one of the things I did want to sort of call out is, some of the things that we've done recently with an ADP. In this case, CISA is providing KEV data. It's providing SSVC data on top of the pre-existing CVSS scores. So I think it's a positive for the community that we're actually providing additional information that is going to enrich those records, but also potentially, and if there's vendors on the call that want to take this idea, I will sign any documentation that says you can have my ideas. But the reality is, with the combined types of ways to look at a vulnerability, those additional capabilities of CAV, those additional capabilities of SSVC, attribute based, and leveraging that with the vector information that you have the ability to do a much better job of prioritization in a tool. If someone could take the time to write the tool, incorporate that into your asset database, and now you can get criticality information out of that for your own infrastructure, and you've got a better approach to actually looking forward to prioritization of remediation mitigation. So if there is something that comes out with a 9.6 vulnerability, is it really a 9.6 for your purpose? Is it really an impact that you are going to have to deal with immediately, or is it in fact something you do need to deal with immediately? At least you have a broader, more rounded way of looking at the risk to your organization. So the CV program is enabling some of that additional information to be able to get to the downstream users, and we're hoping that in the future, additional types of information is going to be able to be contributed and made available to not just the downstream users, but to vendors who can put a better tool in place and make a buck doing it, but they're doing it for the right reasons. They're helping the prioritization of when things have to get remediated.
Right. Helping for when things have to be remediated. Yeah. We have a good question as for the broader CNA community. I know Megazone, you've queued this up to answer. So to you first, and then opening it up. Julia asks, as a CNA, what are the barriers? What are your barriers or cautions or hesitancies around making a CVE record more complete? And if I may, Julia, add to that, by complete, I believe you're recommending or you're suggesting the idea of CWE mappings or CVSS scores, or God forbid, CPE strings and other kinds of information like that. So if that's wrong, please do correct me. Otherwise, Megazone, over to you to the first answer.
Sure. I will say, as a CNA, I don't think we have any hesitancy about adding. We already do. We've been doing CVSS for quite a long time. We've been doing CWE for a while now, and we are looking at CPE. In fact, people who've been in the working groups know that I was one of the very vociferous people about pushing to get the solution that we have coming in 511 out. And once that's available, I've already been talking to development inside about getting that into our tooling so we can support that. And so we are fighting with that kind of data. I don't see a problem providing that. It's all useful. It doesn't aid an attacker, really. Like CVSS vectors really aren't going to be that much. Any intelligent attacker is going to figure that out on their own. And CWE, those things, I don't feel there's any problem providing that. I think it's far more useful to defenders than it is to attackers. Where we have to walk a fine line, I think, is when you're writing your descriptions, or if you're putting details about the exploit in. We want to give enough information that people can make an educated decision about the issue in the further networks. But at the same time, we don't want to give, here's how you conduct the attack, because that's not great for the people actually trying to protect their networks. You're giving the attackers a big leg up. And so we have a lot of discussions internally before we publish CVEs. We have a whole internal process of review, goes through different tiers of review. And a lot of that is discussion of how much detail can we include? What is that line? Or can we walk right up to that line and stop? Because we want to put as much as we can in there without going over. It's like Price is Right, right? So we want to go as much detail as we can to be useful without tipping things to the scales where we're going to make things easier for an attacker than helping, doing more to help the attacker than the defender. I think we do a pretty decent job with that. But it's a constant learning curve, and we take feedback and we iterate on that endlessly. And that's, I think, what you have to do as a CNA. It's just you have to constantly iterate and take a good look at your own processes and where can you improve.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks, Megazone. And yes, I did get confirmation in the chat from Julia that we were talking about those as being complete. But Chris Turner makes an excellent point, which is that complete might mean things differently to different people. And this goes back to the point that I think Art raised as well, which is this notion that the program is actively working to sort of prepare in order to send out a survey instrument of kinds to get this kind of information as to, you know, I don't know. Sometimes a survey can give you a little bit more insight with respect to some details around information that can be valuable to these different stakeholders, and presenting it in the right kind of way. So we have no open questions. We have another open question. That was quick. Okay, so I will read it out loud. How can we get more buy-in from managers, program managers, product managers? I'm often surprised at the, quote, new CNAs email by some vendor that, quote, just now, or star just now, became a CNA. Why aren't those in charge of P-certs or similar orgs not driving their orgs to be CNAs? Is our message missing the right folks? This is a great question. I feel sometimes that there's a choir, speaking to the choir kind of, you know, preaching to the choir kind of problem in our community, right? Even in our working groups, I think sometimes where it's like we're all in the trenches together, perhaps not all of us in the same roles, but dealing with and having the same sort of goals and positive outcomes that we're aiming for. But there's a certain element, and I think Josh hits the nail on the head, which is that we aren't always the decision makers, right? Decision makers often have nothing to do with the security divisions of our respective organizations. And so it's a great point here. And the question, I guess, if I might distill it down, is how can we get more buy-in from these folks? So I will position that for the wider group. Does anybody want to answer that? Megazone, you want to start? Go ahead.
I feel like I'm always putting my hand up, but yeah, I think a lot of it is, I think the security professionals, they say, why aren't P-Search similar orgs not driving their orgs? I think a lot of them are, I know, as a security professional working in this sort internally, we are constantly lobbying for more things to our leadership. And I'm sure a lot of others, I know from my peers across the industry that I talk to, are doing the same. It is a lot of convincing the business people that, airing your dirty laundry is okay. And I think one thing that helps is the more people who join the program, the easier it is for other people to join the program, right? Because you can point to all your peers and say, hey, everyone else jumped off the bridge. Why should not jump off that bridge? Exactly. So, and they jumped off the bridge and they didn't die, right? It's good. And now there's a bit of even shaming going on of all of our competitors, all of our peer vendors are doing this. We should be doing it too. And I think that's one reason why the program seems to be kind of accelerating is we're getting more and more people on board, which makes it easier for other people in these organizations to justify, hey, we should be doing this too. The entire industry is going this direction, and it's helping when we see people like CISA pushing for these things, and ANISA and other organizations saying, hey, we want you to be part of these programs. All of this, I think, helps to turn that and get more vendors on board. So I think we just need to continue a lot of that. It is reaching not just the technical professionals, the security professionals, it's the leadership who really has that final say of does our organization join this or not.
Right. Yeah. Great points. Chris, I see your hand up too.
Yeah. So just to reiterate, there's a couple things, but to reiterate what I said earlier, for the vendor, who are their customers and are they security savvy and are they asking for, seeing CVE information or, whatever, that could definitely be a driver if it affects their bottom line. The other thing too is, and this was on that myths sheet, Alec, but do they look at CVE as being hard? Is it hard to get CVEs? Maybe they're not aware that the CVE program has implemented a lot of changes around automation, and getting a CVE is pretty simple these days. That process is much more streamlined than it used to be. But there could be a lot of folks in the community that look at it as just being something, do we need to spend the resources on that? And it's pretty hard to do. So we need to educate on the fact that it's not hard to do.
Right. All right. We got a couple questions come in, which is great. We can continue to facilitate these here. Let's see. We got one typing an answer. The first question for all CNAs, can you share what's currently your timing between releasing an updated version of your products versus publishing the CVEID record. Excuse me, the CVEID or CVE record. Anybody want to volunteer answering that? So your rough estimate timing between updates of a product, update version versus the CVE information.
I can say what it is for us.
Yeah, Lisa, go ahead.
Of course, we have a group of programmers that build us tools. They're not the best tools, but they are tools, and we put into the publishing system. When we publish it to the security update guide, we publish to CVE.org at the same time. So it's pretty much instantaneous now. But there is a checkbox, and if somebody forgets to check that checkbox, then it doesn't go to CVE.org, and then it's easy to forget since we don't do it as a separate step. But that doesn't happen very often. So.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks, Lisa.
And in Vulnogram, for those users of Vulnogram, you write it. You write the CVE and you push move up to CVE.org. So that in that case, those guys do it pretty much instantaneously too.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. MZ, over to you. Oh, you're muted, Megazone.
It seemed that I thought the question was a little more of like how long does it take you after releasing a fixed product to publishing your CVE? I thought that more, but I know like Microsoft has Patch Tuesday, so pretty much on a monthly basis they're releasing things. For F5, we used to do things. We put the release out and we'd schedule disclosure for the same day or maybe the next day after putting a new software release out. Until we got a lot of feedback from our customers that they really hated that. They despised that because it was kind of like random versions coming out. So we went to a quarterly notification system. So we schedule, we announce ahead of time. Our next QSN, as we call it, is February 5th, 2025. We just did one last week. So every quarter we roll things up. So anything that's been fixed and released since the last time we did one gets announced in the next one. And so I think a lot of different CNAs will have different policies, but like that's how we're handling it as a CNA.
Right. Okay. Oh, Lisa, back to you.
That's a good point, Megazone. I should listen better. The fact is, for just to say, for these no action CVEs that we're putting out where there's no customer action, our gating, we're kind of separating those from Patch Tuesday on purpose because they can happen anytime. And our gating factor really is publish the CVE when the customer is protected. And so we make sure that if it's a cloud vulnerability, that the cloud is fully protected in all the different clouds in the world, right? That we've really deployed and rolled out the fix so that everybody's protected before we announce the CVE.
Right. All right. Thanks, Lisa. This might be our last question, at least it is thus far. Does anybody know this? I don't know this. Is CVE mentioned in the CISSP training material? I have, not me, Josh has or had. CISSP.
Chapter 15, CISSP official study guide has understanding CVEs. Nice. So yes, it is.
All right. There goes that answer. All right. Lisa, I think your hand is still up from before.
That is true.
Okay, just wanted to be sure. Todd questions that fact. Maybe it's difference between the test and the study guide. But who knows? All right, well, yeah, and Chris is answering in text. So it is 1:52 Eastern time. And that means we are already into the closing remarks stage. However, I do not need to take as much time was allotted for me for closing remarks. But I will say a couple words. One, I will say, as we wrap up the workshop today and the last, including yesterday, I want to thank each of you for your time and insights and engagement. I know that everybody on this call has tremendous demands on their time for sure. It's been a fantastic opportunity to connect and learn and discuss ways that we can continue to enhance the CVE program together. We covered a lot of ground, and the presentations, discussions, and your inputs really been invaluable in highlighting both the strengths of the program as it is and areas where we can evolve and better meet the needs of the community. And I think we found some really good opportunities there. I wanted to say a big thank you to all our speakers, all our panelists, and really everybody who participated in the many discussions. It's been a wonderful event. Your contributions really bring fresh perspectives and drive the progress of this program that benefits everyone, right? So I did want to say, as we move forward, let's keep these conversations going. This kind of engagement is really core to the program continuing to provide value for the community, and your feedback as a CNA or just a CVE community member of any kind really is vital in helping CVE leadership understand how the program can support you more effectively. It's a collaborative effort. We've said this a lot of times, right? We're committed to continuous improvement with and through your partnership. So again, thank you for your participation. Quick call out. Thank you to Tom, who's really helped us facilitate the last couple of days. But thank you all for the work you do every day and for being such an integral part of the program. Really looking forward to our continued collaboration. Last thing, gentle reminder, I did want to say it was mentioned once before, but VulnCon 2025, the joint conference hosted by CVE and FIRST, is scheduled for early April, actually maybe the second week of April, now that I think about it. The call for papers is open, so please do keep an eye out whether you have a paper to submit. I know Todd certainly does now, since we did all the work for him. And also just, there'll be registration for sure opening pretty soon. So thank you all again. Really, that's the key moment I wanted to say. And I hope you all have a great rest of your week. And I hope we can all be together again soon.